Blood was everywhere. On the hood, on the snow, on the front of his faded green jacket. The semi had jackknifed across the two-lane highway just outside Maple Ridge, and 3 cars had slammed into it like tin cans against a brick wall. Now engines hissed, glass glittered in the cold, and the only person moving on that frozen stretch of Ohio road at 2:11 a.m. was the nobody from the gas station. Danny Morales knelt on the asphalt beside a minivan that shouldn't even exist anymore, his hands locked over a stranger's sternum, counting under his breath. Headlights carved him out of the darkness, like a scene from some low-budget war movie. His breath steamed in the air. His knuckles were already bruised. "Stay with me," he rasped, voice hoarse, sweat freezing on his neck despite the wind. Behind him, the brand-new SUV belonging to the town's clinic director sat sideways in the ditch, hazard lights blinking, sir. Evelyn Hart stood there, in her expensive wool coat boots, soaked, staring at the man she'd spent 2 weeks quietly investigating. The man she'd been so sure was running drugs or stealing from the register or doing something, anything crooked at this hour. But right now, watching his hands move, hearing the sharp authority in his voice as he barked instructions at panicked bystanders, she knew she'd been wrong about something. Maybe everything. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, still too far away. Right here, right now, on this black strip of ice and twisted metal, it was just Danny and a dying stranger, and the choice he'd already made long before anyone was watching. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Most folks in Maple Ridge knew Daniel Morales as the tired guy behind the bulletproof glass at the Sinclair off-exit 42. 37 years old, dark hair going gray at the temples, broad shoulders hunched from too many night shifts. He sold cigarettes and coffee, unlocked the restroom when truckers asked, and mopped up spilled soda at 3 in the morning. If you asked around, the story was simple. Danny screwed up his life. Divorced. Former Army something or other. Now stuck on graveyard shift at a gas station in a town most people only saw through a windshield. The truth was messier. Danny lived in a cramped upstairs apartment over a closed barbershop, walls lined with second-hand textbooks and medical manuals. His 14-year-old son, Leo, slept in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, earbuds in math homework half finished on his desk. Every morning, Danny dragged himself home just before sunrise, packed Leo's lunch, nagged him about grades, and pretended the dark circles under his own eyes were no big deal. There was a time when he'd worn a different uniform, when Sergeant Morales had meant something. Combat Medic 2 Tours, the guy they called when things went bad, and people were screaming. Then one mission went sideways, one helicopter came in too late, and the noise in his head had never really stopped after that. He didn't talk about it, not to Leo, not to his ex-wife, not to the regulars who joked with him over scratch-off tickets and hot dogs. They just saw a quiet man who never caused trouble, who always worked holidays, who kept his head down. But every night at 1:45 a.m., after the rush of bar-closing traffic died down, Danny would clock out for his break, sling a worn black duffel bag over his shoulder, and disappear out the side door. Evelyn Hart noticed. New to town, fresh from a big city hospital and a divorce of her own, she'd taken over as director of the struggling community clinic 3 weeks earlier. Numbers didn't lie, and the Sinclair's inventory sheet said somebody was signing out more first aid supplies, sports drinks, and cheap blankets than any normal gas station should be selling at night. To her, it added up to one thing: a problem. So on the coldest Tuesday in January, with the wind knifing in off the fields and the highway slick with black ice, Evelyn sat in her SUV across from the Sinclair engine, off watching the front door. At 1:46 a.m., Danny stepped out into the darkness with that duffel bag and started walking toward the highway. She put the SUV in gear and followed headlights off. And that quiet decision to trail the suspicious night clerk for answers was the moment everything in both of their lives began to move toward that bloody, shining stretch of road where the world would finally see who Daniel Morales really was. Danny didn't sleep the morning after the crash. He lay on the old pull-out couch in the living room, boots still on, staring at the ceiling as the first weak light pushed through the blinds. His hands ached from CPR. His throat burned from shouting over the wind. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the minivan driver's face going gray, then pink, then gray again. The paramedics had taken over just as the man's pulse flickered back to life. Danny wasn't even sure if he had made the difference. He only knew he'd tried. Leo shuffled into the room, hair sticking up, hoodie half-zipped backpack, dragging from one shoulder. "Dad, you good?" "Yeah," Danny lied. "Just tired. Grab your lunch." The boy hesitated. Leo always hesitated these days, then nodded and went to the fridge. Danny watched him move around the kitchen like a kid twice his age. Careful, quiet, as if noise might wake the ghosts Danny tried so hard to hide. It wasn't the crash that hollowed out Leo's eyes. It was everything before it. The year Danny had spent shutting everything down. He pushed himself upright. "I'll drive you today." Leo blinked. "You don't have to." "I want to." The boy's guarded expression softened by a hair. He shrugged. "Okay." They headed downstairs, the cold morning air sharp enough to bite. Danny scraped frost off the windshield with an old rewards card keychain, and Leo climbed in without complaint. When Danny dropped him at the middle school curb, a group of kids in oversized puffer jackets snickered nearby. "That's him," one whispered. "Gas station kid. Guess somebody's dad never grew up," another muttered. Leo froze his shoulders, tensing. Danny pretended not to hear, but the words hit him harder than the freezing wind. Leo walked off quickly without looking back. Not angry, not embarrassed, just resigned. Danny drove away with a heaviness that no amount of caffeine could burn through. By noon, the crash was already small-town legend. 3 vehicles totaled, 1 fatality prevented by some miracle, as the local radio host put it. The sheriff's office praised civilians who rendered aid, but of course the names weren't released. Danny preferred it that way. But other people were talking, and not kindly. That afternoon, his manager at the Sinclair, a stocky man named Jeff, with the voice of someone who'd smoked since the Reagan administration, called him into the cramped back office. "You got a minute?" Jeff asked, without looking up from his stack of sales printouts. Danny stepped inside. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. "Listen," Jeff began, scratching at his neck. "Someone from the clinic came by earlier, asked some questions." Danny stayed still, bracing himself. "Said you were at the crash," Jeff continued. "Said you left shift for almost 40 minutes. And, he cleared his throat. She asked if you'd been selling medical supplies under the table. Bandages, cold packs, blankets. The kind of stuff that's been going missing." Danny's jaw tightened. They weren't missing. Jeff's eyes flicked up. "Then what happened to them? I used them," Danny said quietly. "For what?" "For people who needed them." Jeff let out a humorless laugh. "You mean the folks you keep feeding and patching up under the overpass?" Danny said nothing. "I've warned you before," Jeff snapped. "This station is not a charity. Corporate monitors our inventory. We can't have supplies disappearing. We can't have a clerk wandering off into the night like Batman, okay? And now the clinic's looking at me like I'm letting some thief run my midnight shift. Danny swallowed hard. The shame stung, but not for himself. Mr. Hart. Her name's Dr. Hart, Jeff corrected. And she's the one who raised the alarm. Danny felt something cold settle in his gut. Evelyn. The woman he'd seen standing on the shoulder the night of the crash, watching him work. The woman who had looked at him like she was seeing a ghost walk straight through fire. She hadn't been watching out of concern. She'd been gathering evidence. Jeff sighed. Look, Danny, you're a good worker, but corporate's been pushing for cuts, and this whole situation, not great timing. There it was, the threat, softened but unmistakable. Danny nodded once. Understood. He walked back to the counter with a hollow throat and a tight chest. A few hours later, around 3 in the afternoon, Leo texted, "Heard something happened at your work." "Everything okay?" Danny stared at the message. He typed, "All fine. Don't worry. Finish homework. Love you." He deleted the "love you," typed it again, deleted it. Ended up sending only "all fine. Finish homework." It was easier that way. It hurt less. But Leo knew him. The boy responded, "If someone gave you trouble, just don't take it out on yourself. You always do that." Danny set his phone down, throat-burning eyes wet in a way he didn't allow himself to feel. Because Leo had grown up watching his father bleed quietly. And that was on him. At 9 p.m., Danny clocked in for the night shift. Customers drifted through in waves, truckers grabbing coffee, teenagers buying snacks, a few weary travelers with glazed eyes. Danny moved through the routine with practiced ease, stocking shelves, cleaning the soda fountain, refilling windshield fluid outside, while the cold crawled under his collar. At 10:42 p.m., a silver SUV pulled in. He recognized it immediately. The clinic director. Evelyn Hart stepped out, straightening her coat, clutching a folder under one arm. She walked inside with a tight, determined posture. Boots clicking sharply on the tile. Her eyes swept the store until they landed on Danny. "Can we talk?" she asked. Danny didn't look up from the register. "I'm on shift. It won't take long. I'm still on shift." She let out a slow breath, frustrated. "Then I'll make it quick. We need to clear something up." He finally met her eyes. Calm, unreadable. "What did I do?" She placed the folder on the counter. "Things aren't adding up, Mr. Morales. Missing supplies, unlogged transactions, late-night absences. The inventory sheets show patterns. Patterns that suggest that I'm stealing from the Sinclair," he finished flatly. Evelyn hesitated. "I'm not accusing you. You're investigating me," he said quietly. "Let's call it what it is." Color rose to her cheeks. "You've been leaving the station late at night with medical items no one purchased. Maybe there's an explanation. But until I understand what's going on, the clinic can't risk a liability." "A liability," Danny repeated. The word tasted like rust. She pressed on. "I saw you at the crash site. You were performing advanced procedures. Things most civilians wouldn't know. Things even trained EMTs hesitate with. That raises questions. My competence raises questions. Your secrecy does," she said firmly. "People in this town deserve transparency." Danny's jaw moved once, like he was chewing down a piece of grief. "I wasn't hiding," he said quietly. "I was helping." "Then why do it alone? Why disappear every night with a duffel bag? Because people slip through the cracks. And I know what those cracks feel like. Because one mistake in Afghanistan took a friend I can still hear screaming when I close my eyes. Because helping strangers is the only time the world makes sense anymore." He didn't say any of that. He simply answered, Because someone has to. Evelyn softened for the briefest moment, but then her face steeled again, like she remembered something she was supposed to uphold. "That's admirable," she said, "but it doesn't change the fact that supplies are unaccounted for, and if your employer files a complaint—" "He hasn't," Danny said. "Not yet," she corrected. He looked away, throat tightening. "Is that why you followed me last night?" Her silence was answer enough. Danny nodded slowly. "Well, guess that's that." She blinked. "I didn't say you're guilty. I'm just saying I understand," he said. "Believe me." He rang up her purchase 2 protein bars and a small bottle of antiseptic without another word. She opened her mouth as if to speak again, then closed it, picked up the items, and walked out. Danny let the door chime settle before he exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, he felt tired in a way that went deeper than bone. At 11:30 p.m., he checked the clock, grabbed his duffel bag, and stepped into the cold. His breath hung in the air as he crossed the lot, heading toward the quiet stretch of highway where he always went. Tonight, though, a police cruiser rolled up beside him. Sheriff Dalton, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, leaned out the window. "Heard there was some trouble with your boss and the clinic," he said. "Maybe you ought to stay put tonight." Danny's shoulders lifted once. "I'm fine." "You always say that," the sheriff replied. "But folks are starting to talk. Starting to wonder." He let the implication hang. Danny gave a tight smile. "Let them." Dalton hesitated. "You got a good heart, Danny, but good hearts get crushed around here." "I've been crushed before," Danny murmured. He walked off, boots crunching on salt and frozen gravel, leaving the cruiser's headlights fading behind him. By the time he reached his usual turnout near the old access road, his breath was coming faster, not from exertion, but from anger, helplessness, something sharp and old pressing against his ribcage. He unzipped his duffel bag. Inside were blankets, clean clothes, water, first aid supplies he'd paid for out of pocket, and a battered trauma kit he'd carried across continents. He knelt beside a tarp shelter tucked against the tree line. "Frank," he called gently. "You awake?" A man in his 50s, gaunt, shivering, wrapped in a worn coat, blinked up at him. "Hey, Sarge," Frank whispered. "Didn't think you'd make it tonight." Danny forced a smile. "I always make it, even if the whole damn world thinks I'm something I'm not." He checked Frank's temperature, inspected the old shrapnel scar that still refused to heal, right-changed the dressing, and handed him fresh socks. As he worked, his mind replayed every accusation, every sideways glance, every whispered comment that had trickled through town. By the time he stood up, his hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the weight. Frank looked up at him with grateful, fever-glossed eyes. "You're a good man," he murmured. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Danny swallowed hard. He whispered back, "Not tonight, buddy. Not tonight." He packed up slowly, shoulders tight, breath harsh in the cold air. Walking back toward the highway, he felt something inside him coil. Tight. Ready to snap. Because he knew what was waiting. The judgment. The whispers. The suspicion. And he knew something else. Something buried deep. You can only push a man so far before the truth starts pushing back. As he stepped under the streetlight near the Sinclair, he saw 2 figures waiting outside the door. Jeff and Evelyn, both watching him, both holding papers, both looking grim. And that was the moment Danny Morales understood. Whatever came next wasn't going to be about questions anymore. It was going to be a reckoning. Danny stopped under the buzzing street lamp breath hanging in the cold air. Jeff stood with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Evelyn held a clipboard tight against her chest, the wind nipping at her coat. The look on both of their faces told Danny exactly what kind of night this was going to be. Danny Jeff began, "We need to talk. Now." Evelyn didn't speak, but her eyes hard, uncertain. Conflicted never left him. Papers rustled in her hand. Official papers. The kind that didn't leave room for explanations. Danny drew a slow breath and walked toward them. One step. Another. The ground under his boots felt suddenly thinner, as if the whole town had narrowed to this one patch of cracked asphalt. "Is this about the supplies?" he asked. Jeff held up a notice. "Corporate suspending you pending review." Evelyn added, "And the clinic has filed a formal inquiry. You should know that." A car drove by on the highway, headlights sweeping over the scene like a spotlight in an interrogation room. Suspended, investigated, judged. All because he cared too much. Danny stared at the notice without taking it. He looked at Jeff, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He looked at Evelyn, whose expression showed the faintest flicker of regret, but not enough to undo the damage. He wasn't angry. He was tired. So damn tired. "Fine," Danny said quietly. "If that's how it's gotta be." He turned away, ready to walk home, ready to explain the impossible to Leo until a sound split the night. A scream. High-pitched, thin, young. Then another. The three of them froze. Evelyn spun toward the road. Where a pickup truck fishtailed across the far lane, its back tires smoking, then slammed into the guardrail with a thunderous crack. The front end tipped dangerously over the embankment, teetering above the frozen creek below. A second car skidded behind it, swerving hard, colliding with the truck's tailgate before spinning sideways and coming to a stop. Inside the truck, small shadows moved frantically. Kids. Danny didn't think, didn't question, didn't hesitate. He bolted. Danny Evelyn shouted, "Wait. Don't go down there. It's not stable." But he was already sprinting across the highway, dodging glass and debris as the truck's headlights flickered wildly. Steam hissed from the crushed hood, rising like smoke against the night sky. Danny slid down the slope boots, digging into frozen mud-grabbing brush to slow his descent. The truck groaned under its own weight metal, creaking, tilting forward inch by inch. "No, no, no," Danny muttered, pushing harder. 3 children were inside too, in the back seat, 1 in the front. A boy of about 12 pounded against the window with his fists when he saw Danny approaching. "Help!" the boy cried. "My sisters are stuck. My dad's not waking up." Danny looked through the cracked glass. An unconscious man slumped against the steering wheel, blood dripping steadily from a cut above his eyebrow. The girl in the middle seat was bracing herself against the headrest, sobbing. Danny pressed both hands on the window. "It's okay," he said firmly. "I'm right here. I'm gonna get you out." Another groan rippled through the truck as it tipped forward a few more inches. Danny made his decision. He tossed his jacket away and crawled up the side of the truck toward the driver's door, digging his fingers into the warped metal. He'd done this before, in mountains far away, under fire, under pressure, with the smell of burning steel in his lungs. Back then, he'd been Sergeant Morales. Tonight, he didn't need rank. He just needed heart. He grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. He put his shoulder into it. The metal screamed. "Come on." He tried again. "Move." The hinges snapped with a sharp crack, and the door swung open. Cold air rushed in. The two girls in the back screamed again as the truck pitched violently. Danny shoved himself inside, wedging his body against the console to keep the weight balanced. The oldest boy stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, my dad. I'll take care of him," Danny said. "But first we get you out." He unlocked the back door and kicked it open just enough to grab the first girl, maybe 7 years old, cheeks streaked with tears. Danny pulled her toward his chest, shielding her from shattered glass as he climbed back out onto the embankment. Up on the road, Jeff shouted, "I'm calling 911!" Evelyn was already halfway down the slope. "Danny, let me help?" But her boots slid on the frost and she stumbled. Danny reached the top of the incline with the girl in his arms. "Take her," he said. Evelyn grabbed the child voice, softening instantly. "Sweetheart, you're okay. You're okay." She wrapped her arms around the girl and stepped aside. Danny spun and rushed back down. The truck creaked again, tilting even more dangerously. "Hurry!" the boy yelled. Danny climbed inside again. The unconscious father remained slumped forward, seatbelt locked tight. The second little girl clung to her brother. "You two come here," Danny said. He lifted the younger girl first, helping her crawl out through the back door before passing her to Evelyn, who had come closer, now positioning herself where the truck's shadow didn't hide the children from her reach. Then Danny knelt in front of the boy. "Listen, kid. The second you move, the truck's gonna shift. I need you to be brave. You can do that, right?" The boy nodded shakily. Danny guided him toward the opening, pushing him upward, supporting his weight. As soon as the boy reached the doorframe, a loud metallic crack echoed through the air. The front end lurched, the truck's frame screeched, and the entire vehicle slid forward. Danny threw his arm across the boy's back and shoved him out the door hard enough that the kid tumbled safely onto the snowy ground. Then the truck dropped another foot. The front wheels dangled over the edge. Danny lunged for the father, reaching across the console, fingers fumbling for the seatbelt latch. "Come on! Come on!" Finally, the latch popped free. The man slumped toward him, dead weight. The truck shifted again. Danny braced himself. Not yet, not today. He dragged the father backward, inch by inch, muscles screaming, boots slipping against crushed soda cans and broken glass on the floor. A memory flashed, blood sand, a helicopter too late, his friend's hand slipping from his grip. Not again. He hooked his arms under the man's and threw himself toward the open door as the truck jerked violently. His foot caught on the seatbelt strap, nearly pulling him down with the collapsing vehicle, but he yanked free at the last possible second. He and the father tumbled out onto the slope, just as the entire truck groaned, slid and plunged nose first down the embankment, crashing through the icy surface of the creek below. Water exploded upward. Debris flew. Danny rolled onto his back, breath steaming, chest heaving, snow melting against the warmth of his skin. "He's not breathing," the boy cried from above. Danny snapped back into motion and dragged the father fully onto level ground. Evelyn knelt beside him, eyes wide, shaking. "What do we do?" Danny placed 2 fingers against the man's neck. Faint. Weak. "Okay," Danny whispered. "Stay with me." He tilted the man's head back, opened the airway, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He felt ribs shift beneath his palms. He ignored it, pressed harder, stronger. Dad the boy sobbed. Danny leaned in, counting under his breath, lips pressed into a hard line. This is not another life lost. Not tonight. Not while his son was somewhere home asleep, believing, hoping that his father could still be someone worth admiring. Danny breathed for the man, pressed again and again. Then a sputter, a gasp. The father jerked violently, coughing water and air at once. "He's alive!" Evelyn shouted. The boy collapsed onto his knees, clutching his dad's arms, sobbing with relief. The two little girls huddled together, trembling but safe. Up on the highway, the first flash of red-blue lights crested the hill. The fire department, paramedics, Sheriff Dalton's cruiser right behind them. Evelyn turned to Danny, her expression transformed, shock, gratitude, and something deeper breaking across her face. You saved them," she whispered. Danny wiped blood from his knuckles, breath still coming hard. "I did what needed doing," he said simply. But Evelyn shook her head, voice trembling. "No, you did what no one else could." Sheriff Dalton slid down the slope toward them and stopped cold when he saw the scene, the children, the rescued father, the wreckage in the creek below. And then he looked at Danny. Not like the suspicious night clerk, not like the man everyone whispered about, but like someone he had underestimated in every possible way. "Morales," Dalton breathed. "Son, I don't know how you—" Danny stood up slowly. Joints aching, snow stuck to his shirt face, streaked with dirt and sweat. He didn't need praise, didn't need thanks. He only glanced at the children again, alive, shaking, crying into Evelyn's coat. That was enough. But it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Because the moment those first responders saw the scene, the precision of his movements, the way he directed them calmly, the competence that came from years of training, he'd tried to bury the truth about who Danny Morales really was began to take shape. And the people who had doubted him, the people who had judged him, the people who had nearly destroyed his life out of suspicion, were about to learn exactly what kind of man they had almost thrown away. The creek was still settling chunks of ice, knocking together in the black water below, as firefighters anchored ropes and shined high-powered lights into the ravine. Paramedics worked over the rescued father on a stretcher, warming him and stabilizing his breathing. The kids huddled beneath thermal blankets, clinging to Evelyn like she was the last steady thing in a world that had just come apart. But all eyes kept drifting toward Danny. He stood a few yards uphill, leaning against a guardrail he'd half broken during the climb, snow melting on his sleeves, knuckles scraped raw. Steam curled off his breath in slow, heavy clouds. He wasn't talking, wasn't pacing, just standing there watching the family he'd pulled back from the edge of death. The sheriff approached first. Dalton stopped beside Danny, adjusting his hat with stiff fingers. "EMTs say you kept that man alive until they got here." His voice wavered with something close to disbelief. "What you did down there, that wasn't luck. That wasn't instinct." Danny didn't answer. Dalton swallowed hard. That was training. The paramedics, the firefighters, the deputies, they all seemed to sense it at the same time. Like some invisible curtain had slipped, revealing a silhouette they hadn't noticed before. One of the younger firefighters muttered to his partner. "Who is he?" Evelyn heard it. She turned, still kneeling between the children, her eyes locking on Danny with an intensity that was painfully different from the suspicion she'd worn earlier. She stood slowly brushing snow from her coat and walked toward him. When she stopped in front of him, the children watched her anxiously, as if afraid she'd say something to hurt the man who'd saved them. Danny didn't lift his gaze. He just murmured, "They're okay. That's what matters." Evelyn shook her head gently. "That's not all that matters." A paramedic jogged up to them, glancing between the two. "Sir," he said to Danny, "that airway maneuver you used, your military medical. Right combat medic had to be." Danny's jaw flexed once, almost imperceptibly. Evelyn stepped closer. Is that true? He exhaled slow and heavy. A long time ago. Dalton blinked. You never told anybody in town. Wasn't something I wanted to talk about? Danny said softly. The wind carried a few snowflakes between them, bright under the emergency lights. A medic from the stretcher called out, "Sheriff, the father's asking for the man who saved him." Dalton started toward the paramedics, but Evelyn stayed rooted in front of Danny, her voice lowered, almost breaking. I accused you of being a danger, a thief, a liability. Danny didn't look up. You were doing your job. No, she whispered. I was trying to prove something, and I did it at your expense. Jeff finally arrived, trudging down from the Sinclair lot, his face pale and stunned. He held the suspension notice crushed in one hand. Danny, I don't even know what to say. I didn't know you could do any of that. I didn't know who you... He swallowed the rest. Danny only said it's fine. But it wasn't. Everyone knew it wasn't. The firefighters who had dismissed him earlier now asked questions with reverence. The deputies who used to give him suspicious glances now looked at him the way people look at someone who's just done the impossible. Even the rescued boy kept trying to come toward him until a medic insisted he stay under the blanket. Evelyn's voice finally cracked. You saved 4 lives tonight. 4. And I spent 2 weeks trying to get you fired. Danny breathed out again, long and weary. You weren't wrong to ask questions. People do what they can with what they know. But you never once defended yourself, she said. Not when your job was on the line, not when the clinic filed against you, not when the whole town whispered about you. You just took it. He shrugged faintly. I've been through worse. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then forced them open. Danny, who are you really? For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of engines and the shouts of firefighters securing the crash site. Then Danny spoke in a quiet, even tone. I was Army medical for 12 years, 2 tours, lost some good men, lost pieces of myself, too. His voice dipped lower, brittle at the edges. Came home different, didn't fit, and the world moved on. Evelyn took a breath that trembled. So you chose the night shift at a gas station. Chose something simple, Danny said. Something quiet. Something where nobody asked about the nightmares. The headlights glinted off his tired eyes. But you didn't stop helping, she whispered. Danny looked out toward the creek. Couldn't stop. Tried to once. Didn't go well. He didn't elaborate, but Evelyn didn't need details. The meaning was clear, a promise, a failure he never forgave himself for a life he couldn't save long before this night. When he finally met her gaze, his voice was steady, but coated in old pain. If I ever see someone in trouble and do nothing, then I'm not the man my son thinks I am. Everything shifted then. The sheriff straightened his posture. Jeff lowered his eyes. The firefighters stepped back and whispered among themselves, humbled. Evelyn's breath hitched as she took in the full weight of the truth. It wasn't that Danny Morales had been hiding a secret. It was that he'd been carrying a burden. Alone. For years. A medic walked over with a clipboard. Sir, emergency services need a statement. And, the hospital is asking if you'll ride in with the father. He wants to thank you himself. Danny shook his head. Let him rest. He doesn't owe me anything. But the medic pressed gently. He's asking for you. Before Danny could answer, the sheriff interjected. Danny, hang on. Dalton stepped forward, clearing his throat. Look, about that suspension. And the investigation. And everything else? We got it wrong. I got it wrong. Jeff nodded furiously. Corporate don't need to hear nothing from me. We'll tear that whole report up." Danny gave a small, tired smile. "You don't have to do that." Dalton's voice hardened. "Yes, we do." Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her clipboard. "I can withdraw the clinic complaint. Immediately. And I will. Tonight." Danny didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just said softly, "Thank you." But the power shift was unmistakable. The same people who had stood ready to strip him of work reputation and dignity just an hour earlier were now scrambling to undo the damage. And behind the relief in their eyes was something deeper. Respect. The kind that can't be demanded. Only earned. One of the firefighters walked over holding a radio to his ear. "Hey, Sheriff. The county emergency coordinator wants to know who managed the extraction down here. They said the technique sounded advanced." Dalton nodded toward Danny. "Tell him it was him." The firefighter blinked at Danny with visible awe. "You need a job, because we could use someone like Danny. Cut him off gently." "Appreciate it. But I'm not sure what comes next." Evelyn stepped into that quiet, her voice low and steady. "I know what should come next." Danny turned toward her. "You shouldn't be stocking shelves at midnight," she said. "Your skills belong somewhere they can actually save people before they're hanging over a creek. The clinic is understaffed, overworked. Our outreach program barely functions. We need someone who knows how to handle crisis, someone who can train volunteers, someone who knows field medicine better than anyone in this county." She took a breath, choosing her words with care. "We need you, Danny." The shift in the air was immediate. Dalton nodded. The firefighters murmured in agreement. Even Jeff, the guy who was supposed to suspend him, looked relieved at the thought of Danny finding something better. But Danny's face didn't show triumph, only conflict. A deep, quiet conflict. Evelyn watched him, sensing it. "Look, I know you didn't ask for any of this. I know the attention makes you uncomfortable, but you changed tonight's outcome. You changed it because of who you are, not what you did." Danny's gaze dropped to his scraped hands. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Maybe not," Evelyn said softly. "But the world doesn't always wait for ready." Somewhere behind them, the rescued father groaned awake on the stretcher, calling out for his son. The children rushed toward him, sobbing with relief. Danny watched them cling to the man they almost lost, and something shifted in him. A memory of Leo's face, sad patient, too wise for his age, flashed through Danny's mind. His son deserved a father who wasn't hiding in the shadows. A father who wasn't running from the very parts of himself that made him strong. The paramedic by the ambulance called out, "Sir, are you coming?" Danny didn't move right away. He looked at the ruined truck below, at the lights above, at the boy hugging his father. Then at Evelyn. "I'll ride with him," Danny said quietly. "Make sure he's stable." But then he added almost reluctantly, "And after that, we can talk about your offer." Evelyn exhaled a long breath, filled with something like gratitude and something like forgiveness, maybe for him, maybe for herself. Danny stepped toward the ambulance, the cold wind tugging at his shirt. The sheriff watched him go, shaking his head. "I'll be damned." Jeff rubbed the back of his neck. "We almost let him go." Evelyn didn't take her eyes off Danny. "We almost never saw him at all." The ambulance doors closed with a soft thud, its lights reflecting off the icy road. As it drove toward the hospital, Evelyn stood in the beam of the headlights, the wind lifting her hair, a heavy realization settling in her chest. The man she'd misjudged, the man she'd followed with suspicion, the man she'd nearly ruined, had saved 4 lives tonight and revealed a truth none of them had been prepared to see. And now, with that truth fully exposed, Everything was about to change in ways none of them could take back. Morning broke gray and quiet over Maple Ridge, the kind of winter light that seemed to pause before touching the ground. At the hospital entrance, Danny stepped out of the ambulance beside the stretcher, exhausted but steady. The rescued father, pale but conscious, gripped Danny's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," the man whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." Danny shook his head. "Just get better for your kids." Those words echoed softly in the cold air, and when he turned around, he found a small crowd gathering: firefighters, deputies, nurses who'd heard the radio chatter. They didn't stare at him with suspicion anymore. They looked at him the way people look at a lighthouse after a storm. Sheriff Dalton approached first. He removed his hat not out of protocol, but out of respect. "Son, I'd like to formally retract every doubt this town ever threw at you." Jeff from the Sinclair followed, rubbing the back of his neck like a schoolboy, about to confess something. "Danny, that suspension, consider it gone. And if you want your job back..." Danny held up a hand gently. "Jeff, it's okay. That part of my life might be done." Jeff nodded slowly. "Then, thank you for everything." Evelyn came last, walking up with the same slow, careful steps she'd taken the night she followed him. But her expression was different now, humbled. "We filed a withdrawal of the complaint," she said quietly. "The clinic board has already approved it." Danny nodded. "I appreciate that." She hesitated. "The offer still stands. A leadership role. Community outreach, medical training. Whatever you want to take on." She swallowed, meeting his eyes. "We need someone who knows how to show up when it matters most." For the first time in a long while, Danny didn't feel that familiar tug of unworthiness. He felt something else, like a door inside him had finally unlatched. "I'll consider it," he said softly. "But right now, I need to see my son." When Danny walked through the apartment door just after sunrise, Leo was waiting on the couch, fully dressed for school, eyes red from a night with no sleep. "You okay?" the boy asked immediately. Danny crouched beside him. "I'm okay. Some things happened, but..." His voice softened. "I think they happened for a reason." Leo's eyes searched his. "Dad, people online are already talking about it. The sheriff posted something. A firefighter said you saved a whole family. Is it true?" Danny nodded once. Leo swallowed. "I always knew you were good. I just didn't know you were... this." Danny pulled his son into a long, shaking hug. "I'm sorry I hid so much from you." Leo's voice cracked. "I'm just glad you're home." For the first time in years, Danny let himself believe that home didn't have to be a place he hid from. It could be a place he returned to. 6 weeks later, Maple Ridge felt like a different town. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. The father from the crash made a full recovery. His children dropped by the apartment on weekends, bringing drawings and homemade thank you cards. Sheriff Dalton started attending the clinic's community outreach meetings, something he'd never shown interest in before. And Danny, he said yes. Not to a desk job, not to something cushy or ceremonial. He took on the hardest role the clinic had, coordinating nighttime emergency response volunteer crisis training and safety outreach for the most vulnerable corners of the county. He still worked nights, just not behind a convenience counter anymore. He taught teenagers how to stop bleeding in an emergency. He helped the fire chief run drills. He trained deputies on things he'd once learned the hard way. He even took Leo along some evenings, carefully supervised, of course, but enough to show the boy that his father's past didn't have to be a wall between them. It could be a bridge. Evelyn stayed involved too, not out of guilt, but out of respect. She and Danny worked side by side many nights at the outreach center, handing out blankets or patching small injuries, the silence between them no longer heavy with judgment, just understanding. One evening after a long training session, she said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't leave this town." Danny smiled. "For the first time, so am I." A year passed. People still whispered about the Creek rescue, but now it was part of the town's fabric, woven into the stories folks told one another to remind themselves what courage looked like. Danny never asked for recognition, but he accepted something better purpose. He and Leo built a new rhythm. Dinner together. Conversations that didn't end in silence. A father who finally let himself be seen by his own son. And on the anniversary of the crash, the rescued family invited Danny and Leo to their home. The kids had baked a lopsided chocolate cake with "Thank You, Hero" written in shaky frosting. Danny laughed, embarrassed, but Leo nudged him proudly. "You should get used to it," the boy said. "You earned it." When they left that night, Danny paused on the porch, looking out at the quiet street, the glow of porch lights, the hum of distant traffic. A gentle life. A real life. For the first time since the desert sands of his past, he felt something settle deep inside. Something peaceful. Something whole. Call it healing. Call it redemption. Call it the long road back to himself. Whatever it was, it stayed with him as he watched his son climb into the truck, smiling softly in the glow of the dashboard. And as they drove home under a sky full of winter stars, Danny Morales finally understood the truth. Most folks take a lifetime to learn. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do isn't saving strangers in the dark. Sometimes it's letting the light back in.